the 2018 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting. This is the race for Lieutenant Governor.
And welcome. I'm Dennis O'Hare, political contributor with 90.1 WABE, and you are watching the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from the studios of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta. This is the debate between the candidates for Lieutenant Governor, and let's meet them now. They are in alphabetical order. Sarah Riggs Amico, a Democrat. She is executive chairperson of Jack Cooper, the largest vehicle carrier company in North America. And Jeff Duncan, who is a Republican. He has served in the Georgia House of Representatives since 2013, representing the 26th district. That's Forsyth County. Now let's meet our panelists. Giovanna Derpick is a political reporter with CBS 46 in Atlanta, and Dave Williams is a government reporter for the Atlanta Business Chronicle. Now let's get started, and for the rules on today's debate, just visit the Atlanta Press Club website, which is atlantapressclub.org. To start the debate, each candidate will be asked one question by members of our panel. Dave Williams, you get the first question, and it goes to Jeff Duncan.
Good evening, Mr. Duncan.
Good evening.
You're advocating expanding the Rural Hospital Tax Credit Program you sponsored a few years ago in the legislature from $60 million a year to $100 million a year. But critics say that still won't be enough to solve the problem of health care access in rural Georgia. Why do you believe the tax credit program is a better approach than expanding Medicaid, which studies show would generate more money?
Well, I want to thank GPB and the Atlanta Press Club for having us here this evening. And thank you for the question. And the rural health care bill was only intended to be part of the solution. We need to continue to look at other opportunities to increase access throughout Georgia. Doctors, patients, communities all have similar wants and needs out of health care, and that's to have quality health care and also to look for ways to reduce costs. Medicaid is bad health care. There's no other way to put it. You know, I want to lean into a quote that Ronald Reagan gave once, and it was about, judging government programs and the success of them. And he said, we ought to gauge the success of government programs by the number of people we get off of those programs, not the number of people we add to it. Medicaid expansion, I think it's estimated over 400,000 people that are currently insured through their employer would be added to those Medicaid expansion. We need to innovate around healthcare, and we need price transparency. I have an app, like many other people across Georgia, where you can figure out exactly what the lowest cost prescription location is within 5 or 10 miles of your house. We ought to be able to lead on this issue nationally and be able to find ways to get, whether it be primary care or knee replacement or an annual physical or anything in between, be able to find that price transparency.
Thanks very much. Giovanna Derpick has the question for Sarah Riggs Amico.
Good evening, Ms. Amico. Both you and Mr. Duncan are small business owners, but he has actually served in the Georgia State Legislature, so he has experience passing laws. A main job of the Lieutenant Governor is presiding over the state Senate. So what would you tell people who say he would actually be more effective for that reason?
Well, thank you for the question, Giovanna, and thank you to GPB and the Atlanta Press Club for having us tonight. One of the things I do as the executive chairperson of a large transportation and logistics company is actually build diverse coalitions of people and bring them together to solve a problem. In fact, in my business, my job is to bring more than 2,000 union members, more than 1,500 non-union employees, institutional investors, Fortune 100 clients, and a world-class management team, all of these constituencies to the same table, get them rowing in the same direction to deliver the results that our company needs to do for both our customers and our shareholders. And in fact, I think that's very much like the role of Lieutenant Governor in the State Senate. The State Senate, the Lieutenant Governor is the presiding officer, and it should be the triage center for how we prioritize which policies to work on. But if you look at the work of the State Senate over the last couple of years, they haven't been able to fix the problems that most Georgians are worried about. Proper investments in health care, in our public school systems, in the infrastructure we need to have a thriving and dynamic economy like rural broadband. So I think it's a very good way to prep for this role.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the first portion of the debate. In the second round, the candidates will now ask questions of their opponents. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question. The person who's asked has 60 seconds to respond, and then the questioner gets 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And by random selection, Jeff Duncan, you may ask the first question.
Thank you so much. Sarah, you're the executive chairman of Jack Cooper Holdings. And as chairman, you've stated that you have over 4,000 employees that work for you. What policies and procedures do you have in place at Jack Cooper to deal with issues of sexual harassment and racial discrimination? And what would you do if you were to identify an employee that engaged in either one of those activities?
You know, I'm glad you asked the question. So I am the chairman of Jack Cooper Investments now. That is about 2,000 union employees, as I mentioned earlier, and a little over 1,500. So we're closing in on 4,000 employees, which is pretty remarkable given that in 2008, we had only 120 employees. We've grown our business from 120 to almost 4,000 employees in less than a decade. And I'm very proud of our record to create strong anti-harassment and anti-discrimination policies. In fact, under my leadership in the last 4 years as chairman, we have significantly diversified both our board of directors and our senior leadership. In fact, our business units are run by a diverse cross-section of finely qualified executives, and we have instituted things like a 24/7 hotline for employees. Every week, I hold a staff meeting with our CEO and his direct reports, the heads of all of our business units. So as issues are escalated, they come up to me in that weekly meeting, and we make sure we're taking strong and appropriate action.
Thanks very much, Mr. Duncan. You have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, and I absolutely appreciate the answer to that question. And I know these personnel issues can be very, very difficult to deal with. My response is this: why is Kevin Tumbleson still an employee at Jack Cooper Holdings?
Very quickly, we have 30
Absolutely.
seconds.
So with over, as I said, 3,500 employees, I'm not actually sure the name of each of those almost 4,000 employees. But if you'd like to elaborate, I'd be happy to answer further.
All right. Very quickly, do you want to explain who that is?
Yeah, I think we'll be talking a lot about that over the next few days.
All right. Very good. Ms. Amico, your turn to ask a question to Mr. Duncan.
Absolutely. Jeff, we've had a chance to talk a little bit throughout the course of the election as we've been traveling around the state. And one of the things I've noticed is that you repeatedly position yourself to the electorate as an outsider or an underdog. But in fact, you've been in the state legislature for more than 5 years in a party that's held a majority here in Georgia for 14 years. In addition, you held a leadership position within that party of deputy majority whip. You have been backed by more than $3.28 million in your primary alone from out-of-state PACs. How is it that you see yourself as an outsider? And is that really just a tacit admission that even the Republicans acknowledge Georgia needs a change in leadership?
Thanks for the question. And I think it's not only something I embrace as an outsider, but I think many folks around Georgia identify me as an outsider. And I believe it's because of my approach. In my 5 quick years in the General Assembly, I voted against $1 billion worth of tax increases. I looked for opportunities to look through the lens of a small business owner. And that's really, I think, what has identified or kind of gelled me with a lot of folks across Georgia is I'm looking through the same lens they are. I've got 3 kids in a public school system. I understand how hard it is to create a job. I understand how hard it is to keep that person gainfully employed. I understand how burdensome regulations are. And so it's a title I'm proud to be able to receive from folks all over the state. Thank you.
Ms. Amico, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
You know, I'm sympathetic to Jeff's desire to position himself as an outsider. The reality is that in the 14 years the Republican Party has controlled the state, 5 of which you've been in the legislature in a leadership position, including in a leadership position, Georgia now ranks 35th out of 50 states in pre-K through 12 education. We rank 47th in access to health care, and we are dead last in maternal mortality, meaning more women die related to childbirth in this state than anywhere else in our country. You are the definition of an insider, and that record shows why you need to position yourself as otherwise.
All right. Thank you very much. And that concludes our second round. And for those just joining us, first of all, thank you for joining us. And this is the debate between the candidates for Georgia's lieutenant governor. We'll now go back to our panel of journalists to ask questions of the candidates of his or her choice, and in some cases of both candidates, until we run out of time. And as a point of moderator privilege, I may also ask questions, and I also will determine when rebuttals are appropriate. So, Giovanna Derpick, you get the first question.
Mr. Duncan, It's possible that Stacey Abrams could win the race for governor and you could win for lieutenant governor. She's adamant about expanding Medicaid. You are not. Can you give us specific examples of which issues you're willing to compromise on to get things done?
Healthcare is a big issue, right? I think it's an issue we can lead on here in Georgia. I think it's an issue that the rest of the country is trying to figure out the difference between urban healthcare, rural healthcare. Medicaid expansion, as I said in the first question, is not the answer to this here in Georgia. Folks expect better. Medicaid is bad healthcare. We can find additional opportunities to get access into these rural areas. We can continue to leverage innovation and technology. We can invite the best and brightest from around the world to come to Georgia to help us solve this problem here. We talk about Medicaid expansion and infant mortality rates. I'm the father of 3 young kids. I've stared in their eyes when they took their first breath, and I can only imagine if they didn't have prenatal care. But expanding Medicaid doesn't lure doctors into rural Georgia. Why would a doctor ever pick up from practice in an urban setting, go to rural Georgia only to be reimbursed at 80% of cost every time they see a patient that's on Medicaid? They deserve better. I think as Lieutenant Governor, I want to continue to lead this charge in increasing access and looking for ways to cut costs and lead the national conversation.
Dave Williams, your turn to ask a question.
I have a question for Ms. Amico. I want to keep that same subject going for one more question. Democrats, on the other hand, are calling for Georgia to join the 33 states that have expanded Medicaid coverage under the Affordable Care Act. Republicans argue it would cost Georgia taxpayers too much. Why do you believe that expanding Medicaid in Georgia would be a good idea?
Thank you for the question, Dave. We are in a healthcare crisis here in Georgia, and that happened on the Republicans' watch as they've been in the majority for the last 14 years. The numbers are this. We have 64 counties without a pediatrician. We have 79 counties without an OBGYN. It's absolutely no surprise to me that we have the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation. And as a mother to a 5- and 7-year-old daughter, I don't want my daughters growing up in a state that's the most dangerous place in America for them to have a baby. We have got to do something to address it. Of course we can afford Medicare. The Urban Institute earlier this spring estimated a net cost to expand Medicaid next year of $136 million. For that investment, we will create 56,000 jobs. We will put a health insurance card in the pocket of 473,000 Georgians and return $3 billion of Georgia taxpayer money right here to our state to take care of our own people and shore up our health care system.
Thanks very much. The next question comes from Giovanna Derpick.
Ms. Amico, it's possible that Brian Kemp could win the race for governor and you could win for lieutenant governor. He's adamant about not expanding Medicaid. You disagree. Can you give us some specific examples of some issues where you're willing to compromise to get some things done?
Absolutely. So as a business owner, I don't get the luxury to come into my job every day and not get results simply because people disagreed with me. In fact, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this debate, one of the things that I've been good at in my tenure as the chairman of our company is bringing people together even when they don't always start by seeing a problem from the same point of view. And so as Lieutenant Governor, I'd be more than happy to work with a Governor Brian Kemp. I think we could work together to make sure no more of our rural hospitals close. I don't think that's a partisan issue. I think there's not a Republican or a Democrat or an independent in this state who wants to see an 8th hospital in our rural areas close in these last 5 years. I think we can work together on items like independent redistricting to make sure we have fair elections without gerrymandering, where voters continue to choose their representatives, not the other way around. I think we can work together to update our school funding formula, the Quality Basic Education formula, which hasn't been updated since the 1980s. There are plenty of places to work together. Georgia, we just need leaders willing to do it.
Thanks very much. And Dave Williams has the next question.
I have a question for both candidates. Let's start with Jeff Duncan. As the student enrollment keeps going up in the university system, the percentage of the Hope Scholarship Program is covered by lottery revenue keeps going down. Some lawmakers have talked about solving that by legalizing casinos in Georgia and taking a part of that revenue and dedicating it to the Hope program and also to pre-K. What's your view on that?
All right, and you'll both have 60 seconds, again, starting with Mr. Duncan.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. This has been a question we've talked about. I've gotten to talk about over the last 18 months. And, you know, I think Georgia has not had a discussion about casinos. They've had a discussion about the shiny object of all the things casinos could help. I think if Georgia had a true discussion, voters, citizens of Georgia had true discussions about casinos, they would all come to the same point, and that's we're not ready for casinos. This isn't the place for them. This isn't the time for them. Higher ed is one of those areas where I think we need to continue to look at how we control costs at spending. I've got 3 young kids. My wife and I are diligently planning to send those kids off to college. I can tell you that when my wife and I went to college together, it's dramatically more expensive to receive that education here in the state of Georgia. I think it's an opportunity for us to really look at ways to control those costs and those inputs. But I can tell you that, the other party and my opponent has advocated allowing illegal aliens, illegal immigrants to come in here and receive the Hope Scholarship. And I will not put that program at risk, not one single day as Lieutenant Governor.
Ms. Amico.
Specifically regarding undocumented children who are here in this country, I'm of a very simple belief, and I think it's a belief that's shared across Georgia in every nook and cranny of this state where I've traveled. We don't punish children in this country for the sins of their parents. So yes, I believe they should have access to hope. I'd like to believe that's something we could all get to agreement on. But in terms of your question of revenue sources to fund higher education, I think we have to be open to everything. The reality is that we have fallen not just in higher education, we are at 35th in pre-K through 12. So making sure our students are competitive heading into those institutions, Georgia needs to come up with solutions to generate incremental revenue so that we can put more money into education. I would certainly be open to a conversation about the gaming industry, but candidly, I'd also be open to whether or not we could expand in-state or have in-state cultivation of medical marijuana and use those revenue sources to fund the investments our state desperately needs.
Right. Thank you very much to both of you. Giovanna Derpick has the next question.
Mr. Duncan, many people see the talk about gangs and illegal immigration as code for targeting minorities. Can you give an example of something you've done legislatively or otherwise that has specifically helped the minority community?
Yeah, so I think that a number of bills that I've been a part of and co-signed, but one I'd like to talk about specifically was the Cargo Theft Act. Organized crime had moved into Georgia, and very little people knew about it, except if your business was losing millions of dollars worth of cargo a month or a year. What we found out with working with the GBI is that it was the Cuban crime family that had moved into this state for decades and had begun to set up a network and stealing trucks because the law simply said if you stole a truck, you went to jail for stealing the truck and not the cargo. And companies were losing millions of dollars. Those were jobs. Those were copper companies. Those were pharmaceutical companies. Those were technology companies. We simply just said if you steal $1 million worth of cargo, just like if you stole $1 million from a bank, you'd go to jail for 20 years. In 1 year, cargo theft went down 68% in this state. That affects everybody. That affects every community. And I believe it was a big part of my legislative success.
Thank you. Dave Williams has the next question.
I'll have a question for both candidates. Let's start with Ms. Amico. The film tax credit in Georgia is hugely popular. It's done a great job. It's incentivized lots of films. But there are some folks in the legislature and elsewhere who say we're giving away too much in tax incentives. It's costing taxpayers. Should we work to rein in that practice?
No, absolutely not. The film and television industry here in Georgia generates nearly $10 billion a year in economic activity. In fact, there's a reason that Republican Governor Nathan Deal mentioned this industry first in his State of the State address last January. This is an important and thriving industry. As Nathan Deal mentioned in his State of the State speech, it is bringing high-quality, high-income jobs right here to the state. And remember, when we create jobs in the film and television industry, we're not just creating those jobs, we're creating the secondary and tertiary level of jobs, the companies that service, the hotels that house those industry workers. This is good for Georgia. This is good for business, and it deserves to stay here.
Let me broaden it a little bit, because I really mean, I think that's a popular program. My question is, should we be looking maybe in other areas where we're having lots of tax incentives in other industries? Should we be being careful on that and perhaps reining that in elsewhere?
We'll give you just 30 seconds on this, and then Mr. Duncan.
Absolutely. Look, I think it's something we should review these tax credits every year. But I don't think we should go in and wholesale say that we should cut anything out until we've assessed on a year-by-year basis the budget and what revenue and what jobs specifically it impacts here in Georgia.
Mr. Duncan.
I think Governor Deal's vision on the film tax credit was one that will leave a long legacy. I applaud him for it. And here's what I think went right with the film tax credit, is there was an opportunity to incentivize an industry not laser focus on one particular company and give them a tailwind that allowed them to compete in an unfair manner against their other competitors. We need to look at opportunities to help industries and to let free market principles. And that's what we're seeing with the $10 billion worth of economic impact here in the state. There's entire vendor groups moving here. There's entire, families are not just coming here for a project, they're coming here for an entire career. And I think going forward as Lieutenant Governor and hopefully taking on the title of Business Ambassador also in that role is walking through industries that we feel like we can bring here to Georgia. On the campaign trail, as I traveled through rural Georgia, I came up with an idea called BIG, Built in Georgia. I want rural Georgia to be the production capital of the Southeast. I want all of Georgia to be the technology capital of the East Coast. These are big ideas, and look forward to working with industries, and not just necessarily companies.
Thanks very much. And the next question comes from Giovanna Derpick.
Ms. Amico, if people are happy with Governor Deal, why would they choose you, a Democrat?
I think what I've said is that there are a lot of things that have gone very well. We've recovered from the recession. I think the film industry tax credits will be a great example of his legacy, but that's not to say the work is done. In fact, I think you can argue that after having one party and one party only in charge of Georgia for 14 years, if we look at the numbers, then you see the need for a change. Guys, Georgia is 35th in the nation for pre-K through 12 education. We're 47th in access to health insurance, and again, 50th out of 50 in maternal mortality rates. If there were solutions that were going to work from the other side, we would have seen it by now. They've had 14 years of trying. Anything that they should have, could have, would have done, they should have done in those 14 years. My view is that Georgia, it's time for a breath of fresh air and somebody who will come in and not need 14 years to get the job done.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question. It comes from Dave Williams.
I have a question for Jeff Duncan. The religious freedom issue continues to be heard in the legislature pretty much on a yearly basis. Governor Deal vetoed a bill at one point. As Lieutenant Governor, you certainly would be in a position to take a stand one way or the other, either to support or block that legislation. What would you do if that's an attempt to get that to the Senate floor?
So I start this position as a man of faith. It's something that's important to me each and every day. I think it's important to recognize that the Founding Fathers' intent was freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. This has been a big conversation all across the state. As Lieutenant Governor, I want to be a part of creating a conversation, right? Not a shouting match, but a conversation between the legislative community, the business community, and the faith community, to be able to talk about this issue in a way to truly identify if there are those that are being discriminated against for their religious purposes. Let's identify those. Let's make sure that doesn't happen. Let's also make sure that we don't have any sort of overreach. I think the initial legislation that was proposed in the early 1990s that President Bill Clinton signed, and virtually unanimous and bipartisan support that the courts later overruled at the state level, I think that's something that we could talk about and create a great conversation here in the state of Georgia. Let's lead on this issue. There's other states that are trying to figure this out. Let's lead on this issue.
All right. Thanks very much. And unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. And Sarah Riggs-Amico, you get the first one.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for taking the time to watch. I think over the course of this debate, you've heard two competing visions for the future of Georgia. I believe our best days are ahead of us. I believe, Georgia, that we shouldn't be a place that discriminates against anyone because of how they look or who they love or how or if they pray. Georgia, we're better than that. Just like we're better than being 35th out of 50 states in pre-K through 12 education. Just like we're better than the highest maternal mortality rate in the nation. Georgia, I believe this November 6th, you can vote for better. I believe a sick child in 2018 should be able to go to the doctor, full stop. I believe in fully funded schools every year in our public school system, not once every 16 years as the Republican Party has done. They've only fully funded our schools once from 2002 to 2018. So Georgia, I'm asking for your vote to be Georgia's next Lieutenant Governor. Let's go build an inclusive and thriving and dynamic economy that works for everyone.
Thank you very much. Jeff Duncan, it's your turn.
The last 18 months have been an amazing journey for my wife and for our three boys. And from day one, this hasn't just been about winning an election. This has been about creating a movement that simply says we the people are better at solving problems. than we, the government. In the closing weeks of this election, my job is to continue to talk to voters all across Georgia and remind them of the great successes we're having in this state with conservative leadership. We're fully funding K through 12 education. We've got 3.8% unemployment. And for the first time ever, every single person in Georgia received a personal income tax cut. On November 6th, Georgia's going to decide if we're going to continue to be recognized as that shining city on the side of the hill that Reagan talked about, or we're going to elect folks like my opponent who wants to import California's values and their problems. Georgia's a great place to run your business, but it's also a great place to raise your family. And as Lieutenant Governor, I'm going to fight hard every single day to protect that. My name's Jeff Duncan. I'd love to have your vote on November 6th to be your next Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you very much. Thanks to you both. And that concludes our debate, and we'd like to remind voters, as both of the candidates did, Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th, and early voting begins October 15th. Our thanks to the candidates and to our panel of journalists, and we'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging today's debate. Now, for more information on the full schedule of general election debates, just visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there. It'll also be on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. I'm Dennis O'Hare. Thank you very much for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Have a great day.